Hello chaps and chapettes, I hope you are all well. Today I am looking at the first time Australia went to war. Now technically the Australian military did not come into existence until 1901 when Australia became a Commonwealth. However, prior to this event there were military conflicts and Australian boots on foreign soil. Of course, prior to this the Australian and New Zealanders had fought wars but on home soil. You could say that the Taranaki War was the first time when HMCSS Victoria sailed there, that the Australians went to war on foreign soil. I'm not kind of counting this because it's kind of New Zealand, and yeah, okay, we're moving over this aspect of time period a little bit. We're going to when Australia and New Zealand are kind of formed. There's no genocides on the soil of the native people. The First Nation of Australia, the Maori people of New Zealand, and the islands that surround it. We're just going to gloss over that for this. But in this little tale, we're talking about the first time part of the 6 colonies sent troops overseas. During this time, each state had its own militia and navy. Between the 1850s to 1900s, the militia was made up of mainly unpaid volunteers with the odd paid soldier. It was not until the 1870s that engineers and artillery brigades were implemented, and there was some reformation into the military structure and military forces of the Australian militia. In 1885, the Australian military numbered around about 21,000 men. In the 1880s, Britain was busy empire building, as was often the case, and their attention was now on Africa, namely Sudan, with the Egyptians there to help them expand their land and maybe own a nice long stretch of land across Africa. However, the locals, as ever, were not happy with this, and a blasted rebellion happened. Now, of course, it is far more complex than that, but a simple explanation is Muhammad Ahmed bin Abd Allah was named Mahdi, basically a position named as the guided one, or one to restore justice, equality, and religion. They can hold really great power, especially over the people, and that he did. Egypt was concerned about the Sudanese rebellion and raised an army of 4,000 men strong, more than enough to squash the Mahdist gathering, whose members were mainly armed with sticks, stones, and the odd sharpened kiwi fruit. Egypt's leader, Yusuf Pasha, was confident in a quick victory. So much so, they set up camp on the 7th of June 1882 within sight of their enemy, to fill them with fear and terror. However, the overconfident Egyptian forces did not set sentries. Now you may spot a slight mistake here in their defence system here. They did not dig in either, and had no defensive positioning. The next morning saw 4,000 dead Egyptians, and now a rebel army with a vast array of new guns and equipment. Surprise, surprise. Things did not get better for Egypt. Although now mainly under British control, the army reformed and marched on the city of El Obeid under the command of William Hicks. Around 8,000 men marched equipped with 4 80mm field guns, 10 76mm mountain guns, and 6 Nordenfeld organ machine guns, I should say. Although they had an advantage with technology, they lacked 2 things. One was numbers. At this stage, the Mahdi gathering had around 40,000 men. And second was the fact that Hicks's force was, as trained as a particularly carefree cat. Winston Churchill described the army as, in his quotation, "perhaps the worst army that has ever marched into war." The forces under Hicks had no training whatsoever. The training they did receive was being given a gun, told which way to point it. In some accounts, some of them did not even get that correct, managing to shoot themselves. Some were taught how to reload said gun, some were not, however, and how to fix a bayonet. Yeah, pretty bad. They had no training, they were not paid as well, which probably didn't help things, as they weren't exactly eager to go and fight in a war, and not being paid doesn't really help the matters. And as I said, they had the discipline of me around a chocolate cake, which is absolutely none. The Mahdist army, on the other hand, were constantly being drilled, along with the fact that many were now battle-hardened. And with that fact, they had gathered an impressive armoury with their victories as well. They had weaponry. Now, the Mahdists had actually cut down their rifles, and that caused them issues with long-range firing. But they would often ride on horseback and go for a more close-range engagement. The dervish style of warfare was to get close and, hack away with I can't remember the name of the sword now, but, sword and getting close effectively, almost cavalry charges. And, of course, they would shorten their rifles so it was easier to wield, but that, of course, did reduce the accuracy. So, at range, they kind of were at a disadvantage. Luckily, none of the 8,000 men in William Hicks's army, other than probably Hicks and about the two other officers in the army, could actually hit anything with their guns. So, after the rifle smoke had cleared, less than 500 Egyptian soldiers had escaped the Battle of El Obeid, and the Mahdists now had gained more weaponry, munitions, supplies, and artillery. Yeah, it didn't go well for the British forces there, and especially the Egyptians. The Empire decided to try something new and sent Charles China Gordon to become governor of Sudan. His job was to help withdraw Egyptians. However, Gordon did not want to leave a man behind, considering it a slight on his honour. He soon got besieged and stuck in Khartoum by 50,000 Mahdist soldiers. The city's stores had several million rounds of ammunition in stowage and food that would last around 6 months. After 313 days, the siege was over. The expeditionary forces sent to try and save the city arrived 2 days too late and found the site an absolute massacre. I believe pretty much nobody was left alive in there. When the news of the defeat made it to Australia, the Governor of New South Wales was shocked and angered to such a point that he offered his state's aid, and thus the New South Wales contingent was formed. 770 men with 200 horses, an artillery battery with a field ambulance led by Colonel John Richardson, a veteran of Crimea and the wars in New Zealand. The 3rd of March 1885 saw the army board the SS Iberia and the SS Australasian, and with a crowd of over 200,000 watching from the shores of Sydney, they set sail. It was seen in the media as a coming of age for the Australian colonies. Now, it's worth noting here that Victoria, Queensland, South Australia had all offered aid to Britain as well, but the government had declined their offer. This is because they didn't really think that they were going to win in Sudan and didn't really want to have a mass loss of colonial troops, as it would have really looked bad and probably not helped the public opinion in Australia at the time. The contingent arrived in the port of Sukin on the 29th of March, and as always, I apologise about pronunciation. As they disembarked, they were reissued with new khaki field uniforms to replace their scarlet redcoats with white trousers, to give them a more suitable colour for fighting in the dunes of a desert. The Australians were attached to the Coldstream Guards. On the 2nd of April, the Long March to Tami began. In a square formation made up of around 10,000 men, the force razed the town. They were being led by General Kitchener at the time as well. The majority of the Australian forces were then sent to Berber to aid in guard duties and the completion of a railway, where most remained until they came home. this humdrum life was far from the excitement and battle the men were after. So when the call for volunteers was raised, 50 men put up their hands immediately to form a new unit, a new warfare, a new division, a new kind of military. Yes, the Imperial Camel Corps. The 6th of May saw their first mission, reconnaissance to Takdul. The men were excited and ready to do battle, but all they found on their journey were 2 newspaper correspondents. The patrol was over and the group returned to Sukin to file their stories and fill in their paperwork. However, their lust for excitement was about to be fulfilled. A few hundred Mahdist soldiers surrounded the small scout group, and a heavy skirmish started between the 2 forces. One of the plucky Camel Corps was wounded, but over 100 Mahdist soldiers laid killed or captured by around 50 of the Australian Camel Corps division. They were outnumbered, I think, 3-1. I think in this battle, it was pretty darn good. Good job they did, considering that casualties was just 1 man and 1 disgruntled camel. So all in all, a good job. The Camel Corps would head out for one last mission on the 15th of May to bury the dead. The Artillery Division had a far more relaxed time, posted at Handub, where they spent 6 months doing artillery drills and not much else. The ambulance, or the hospital division that was sent there, actually did quite a bit of work, helping patch people up and things like that. By May, the British had decided to pull out of the Sudan, and thus Australia's first expeditionary force was sent back home. The 770 men boarded the SS Arab for Sydney, and all but 9 made it back to Sydney. Sadly, 9 of the unit died of illness on the return journey, with 3 men coming home wounded, as well as 1 disgruntled camel. Arriving home, the contingent was redistributed to the local militia, but the members were awarded with the Egypt Medal and the Khedive's Star. And in 1907, the New South Wales Infantry Regiment, which was the descendant of the contingent, was awarded the Army's first battle honours, and indeed Australia's first battle honours, Sukin, 1885. Although it was a very minor effort with few soldiers and equipment, the fact these men chose to leave their island nation and travel to aid the Commonwealth proved that Australia was willing and able to help. And from that day on, the men and women of Australia and New Zealand armed forces have done such. From Sudan, South Africa, China, the World Wars, Malaya, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so many more. So many have chosen to fight for their nation, for their country, and for the ANZACS. And for that, we thank them all. Thank you for watching this. I hope you found it interesting. Enjoyed it. This was put out on Anzac Day 2022, of course, to celebrate the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, and really to celebrate all the magnificent work that they do, from humanitarian projects, peacekeeping, things like that. It's one of those stories that often gets forgotten about. Sudan is one of those little military operations that gets overlooked in history, and especially Australia's efforts in it. Similar to that of Vietnam, of course, where often is forgotten that the ANZACS fought, and it's very much seen as an American war, but it wasn't. There were other nations fighting in that war, of course. I might do a little bit more on this one. Of course, I do want to look at the Boer War in South Africa, of course. I have done a little bit of a video on this down at the Adelaide Parade Grounds, of course, which was founded and made for the leaving of the South Australian troops to head to South Africa, of course, where they also have a couple of the old cannons captured from Crimea. You can find that video on my channel. I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I will see you again next time. Bye bye.